Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying our second and last day of the conference. Can't believe it's almost over. My name is Rafa. I'm a first-year MBA student here at Sloan, and I'm really excited to present our next speaker on the Competitive Advantage Talks presented by Kager. The competitive advantage conversation is going to be about a trail runner's steep climb on a mountain of data. And please help me, give a warm welcome to our next speaker, Ricardo Fogliato, PhD candidate in statistics at Carnegie Mellon University.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. Just to get a sense, how many runners are in the room? Good. OK, so that explains why you're here. So we are not going to talk about running, but we're going to talk about trail running today. And I will soon explain why this title. So first, what is trail running? If you're a runner, for sure you know it. It's like basically running on the trails. The trails can be anywhere, in the desert, on the mountains, or just outside of your house. But basically, what brings us all together is this connection with the nature. And one of the reasons why I'm talking here is I'm doing a PhD in statistics, so I love trail running. And I was like, OK, I probably can do a project on trail running. And obviously, I'm also a trail runner, a very bad trail runner, but I try to do it. So how big is trail running? Here, what we are seeing is data from ITRA, the International Trail Running Organization, which was the main circuit of trail running races until a few years ago, until last year, perhaps. And you can see that in 2010, we had about 300 races in the entire world that were part of ITRA. And 2011, it increased. 2012, it increased again. But we are still talking about not that many races. So this is actually how it's going to nowadays. So this is UTMB, Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc. The picture was taken a few years ago. And it's just exploding. So this is the full plot. So you can see that in 2013, it increased. And in 2018, we had about 4,000 races. Obviously, it's not as big as basketball or baseball and so on. But I don't know. I'm a trail runner. I find it extremely exciting that it's getting so large. And so many of my friends are getting into that and so on. So let's say now I have somewhat convinced you that you want to go and try some trail running race, and you go to Oregon and you want to do a Mountain Lakes 100. Probably you should not start with this if you haven't done any, but let's just go with this. The question is, how long is it going to take me, like a 100-mile race? So this plot comes from data that I took from an Italian company. It's called Rumble. It's similar to Strava. You can think about it. And you can see how long it takes for a certain distance for all of the runners. These are runners of different levels. They take a different pace and so on. And you can see that, for example, for 10-kilometer distance, runners are going to take between 40 minutes and 60 minutes. This is for road running, though. What happens when we insert trail running? This is what it looks like. So this is data that we took from ITRA, again, the International Trail Running Organization. And obviously, you can see that for a distance of 15, 20, 25 kilometers, there is so much variation, because it's not just the pace that matters. It really matters what's the elevation gain. You can have a 20-kilometer race with 3,000, 4,000 feet of elevation gain. And also, it matters the terrain. Are you running on the snow? Are you running on a difficult terrain? Are you running in the desert? What is it? And obviously, the weather. The weather plays a major role here. And obviously, we have just looked at only 0 to 25 kilometers. But what happens when we go with longer races? And let's look here. Basically, you can see that the variance, the time spent between the fastest and the slowest runner increases. And when we are talking about 100-kilometer races, some races, the first runner might finish in 15 hours. That's the Western State, for example. It's actually a 100-mile race. It's was run last year by Jim Worsley in 14 hours. And some runners might run it in 30 hours, 40 hours. So there is this increasing variance. And it obviously really matters luck. What's the weather like? What's your nutrition? Were you able? Did you have a good day? And so on. And another factor you need to take into account is not just are you going to finish the race or not. It's really, what is it likely that you're going to finish the race? And you can see here for each distance, this is again data I took from ITRA, so all the results for the past 10 years of the ITRA races. And the likelihood that you're going to drop out and not finish the race increases. And for 100-kilometer races, this likelihood is about 25%, which means that in all the races, about 1/4 of the runners are not even going to finish the race. And you can imagine if you're in the middle of the mountains, there need to be shuttles that take you back to where you started. So let's make a concrete example. And let's say you want to compete in Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc, which is a picture I show in the second slide. Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc is probably the most famous trail running race in the world. It's 106 miles of distance and 30,000 elevation gain. Feet of elevation gain. And this is the race profile. So what you need to look at here are the green and the blue points are 8 stations or checkpoints. This is where you can get food, there is medical stuff, sometimes you can also sleep, and generally you can meet your supporters. So typically runners also have a crew that can help them and bring some food and so on. And the other thing you need to take into account are these red labels, which are the time barriers. So if you don't get there by that time, then you need to drop out of the race. So the maximum time to finish the entire race is 45 hours. But the first runner is going to finish it in 20 hours. So how can you prepare for such a race? One thing to obviously take into account is nutrition. So what do you need to eat? You probably need to have an intake of 3,000 calories, 4,000 calories, and so on. And the other related variable is the pacing. How fast should you actually run the race? At the other hand, there is also the organizer, so race directors. What do they want to know is runner safety. We want to ensure runner safety. And something I always get told by race directors is they want to know how crowded the aid stations will be. So this is a picture I took at UTMB 5 years ago. And you can see there were like so many people in just one room in the middle of the mountains. And especially in these COVID era times, you want to avoid that. So you want to make the aid stations larger and bigger if you think there are going to be too many runners at the same time. So what we did, given that I'm in academia, with some friends, we started this project, which we call TRAP, so Trail Running Assessment of Performance, that was published in JQAS a few years ago. And we tried to tackle these problems with data. So let me just show you what we basically did. So let's make an example, and we have some data. And in this case, I'm just taking into account the runners' ranking in previous races. But obviously, we can also take into account how many races you have done and other factors, your age and so on. But let's say we just take a runners' ranking, and then we also take into account all the data from UTMB from several previous editions. And we build some classification regression model, and we want to make some prediction. So for example, in this case, based on your ranking in the previous races, we can obviously predict your expected finishing time. So you see here that so 100% ranking means the worst ranking you can have. 0% is the best ranking. So you can see that if you have a very good ranking, your finishing time will be around 20 hours, 25 hours, and that is going to increase as your ranking in previous races is worse. At the same time, we can also obviously compute what's the likelihood that you're going to finish the race. And this race, again, is very long, and about 60 to 70% of the racers actually do finish it. So a lot of them will never finish the race. And you can see here that as your ranking increases, which means your performance was worse in previous races, then we can also compute the likelihood that you're going to finish the race, which peaks at 75% and goes down to 25%. So it means that if your ranking is above 50%, it's very unlikely that you're actually going to finish the race. But obviously, we can also do predictions throughout the race. And this was the most interesting part. Let's say you get to the first station, which was Le Contamine in this case. And we want to predict when you're going to get to Courmayeur. Courmayeur is almost in the middle of a race after 80 kilometers. It means that you have already spent probably 15 hours during the race. So it's going to be very tiring. We basically construct these regression models that predict for each station how long it's going to take you to get to the next 8 stations. And for example, in this case, we can take into account the fact that your ranking is 50% right now, and you have already spent 5 hours in the race. So what we predict is the likelihood that you're going to drop out, the expected time, because this is interesting for your supporters who want to be there, and also for race organizers. And we're also going to predict the minimum time that you're going to get there. Because you can imagine supporters need to travel around the mountains to reach you at the next 8 stations. So they really want you to be there for you. They don't want you to get there before they can. And this can be done at each single 8 station and so on. And also, obviously, at each single checkpoint. And so on. And basically, we keep updating the predictions until you get to the end of the race. And this tool, again, is useful for both the runners and for race directors for different purposes. So let's say now that you have finished the race, and you get to the end, and you are very happy, and perhaps you say you will never do another race, and then you just go back home and you just register for a new race. But you want to evaluate how good was the race. Did I do well? Didn't I? And typically, if you're a trail runner, there are 2 indices that you are used to seeing. One index is on the right, the ITRA score, so the International Trail Running Organization score. And this index is constructed by basically computing the best possible finishing time in some very complex manner and comparing it with your finishing time. This is some kind of black box, and it provides some score from 1 to 1,000. In my case, for example, it's 670, which is pretty bad. If instead you're in the US, perhaps you know about the Ultra Sign Up score. Ultra Sign Up is the leading trail running organization platform for race registration. And this index is much simpler. So you take your best finishing time, so the finishing time of a first runner, and you divide it by your finishing time. So if a first runner did 10 hours and you did 20 hours in the race, your score will be 50%. So you can see that this is very simple and transparent. And I was contacted actually by David Callahan, who is one of the owners of Ultra Sign Up. And we were like, OK, how can we even improve this score? So we started thinking about what do we want from a score. And I don't have a solution, but I have some ideas. So what we thought was the score should be transparent, should be simple, and should be fair. Everybody, we talked to ITRA, we talked to other organizations, everybody was saying the index should be fair. What does it really mean? It's a bit unclear at the moment. But for example, so this is the distribution of a scores. If you do a race, this is the distribution you're going to see for the current system. So it's basically somewhat normal. It peaks around 60%, and then it's up to 100. What if we were to change this score? So here is the position-based ranking. So again, the current ranking is based on time, but obviously we could change it to position. So this might be one solution. We change the ranking to position. And everybody will get this uniform distribution ranking. At the same time, there is this thing, the ranking is based on gender now. So women and men have separate rankings. The problem of this is that, first, how do we handle transgender athletes? And the problem is already with women, because there are not so many women in each race. And the index is very noisy. And when we talk about noise, you can think about doing a race in the middle of nowhere. There are probably going to be 3 people in total. If you do a race in the middle of the Alps, or if you do a race in Utah or Colorado, everybody's going to be good, and you're going to have a lot of competition. So there, we don't really have much noise. But in these races in Kentucky and so on, there is much less competition, and therefore our estimates are noisy. So we really want to increase sample size for each race, and therefore we would like to have just one unique index for both males, females, and everybody. What's the problem here? The problem is that obviously we would disadvantage women in this case. We would reduce noise, but we would be disadvantaging female runners. Because in this case, you can see they will get lower scores compared to males. So what we did, and again, we don't have a solution at the moment. We are still thinking about how to do it. And if you have some ideas, Devin and I will be so happy to hear it from you. We conducted a survey with about 300 responses from race directors and other runners about to understand what the community wanted from this revised index for your ultra sign-up. And we had there was some high agreement on these topics, which were the scores should lie within the range of 0 to 100. And separate rankings by gender, which you might expect, and that the competition in each race should really matter. So if there is more competition, then that should be taken into account into the index. And all of this makes sense, but then we got to the high disagreement cases. So should DNF count? So if you withdraw from the race, is it good, is it bad? Should it count towards your score? Should all performances or only the top 10 performances count? Or should we be taking into account only the last 5 years of your performances? And lastly, should the position or your ranking matter? And really, in these cases, the community was 50-50. Half of the people said one thing, and the other half said the other thing. So we don't have a solution at the moment. The solution we have is to construct a dashboard where people can play with, runners can play with their index and see how it will change so that everybody will be happy. And then we try to understand, again, once runners have seen what the score will look like, how to actually revise the score and not make anybody angry. But in the meantime, so these are the things that we think are worth. So it's so hard to get data here. The project I described, the trap, we had to scrape data all over the internet. I talk to race directors all the time, and it's unbelievably hard to actually get data. So this is really the hardest part of the problem. And there is very little interest from researchers. So there are a lot of people that are interested in doing things about trail running, but partly exactly because the data collection and data sharing is so hard, it takes a lot of time. So if you're interested, let's definitely chat. And I'm on time, yes. And yeah, thanks to all these people that have given a lot of ideas and have been great. So thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, this is super interesting. Going back a long ways back to your kind of race prediction model, can you talk a little more about the independent variables that are involved and what is specific to the individual runner versus specific to the race versus more generalizable?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So what we did in this case, and that's why data collection was so hard, is that we did not really have data about the runners. So once you look at, for example, UTMB results, you get the age category of a runner, the country of origin, and the sex. That's what you get. So what we did, we basically scraped the entire ITRA dataset. The entire ITRA dataset contains all the races. So in order to participate in UTMB, people need to have races in the ITRA circuit because they need ITRA points. They needed, now not anymore. So we scraped the entire ITRA dataset. So for each runner, we constructed their basically history of races in ITRA. And then we aggregated all the performances. So for example, some variables were again, the ranking in their previous races, the best ranking, where they were racing mostly, how long they had been racing, how many years they had done the year, how many races they had done in the year before the UTMB, and so on. And then we basically did the feature selection to find the model for this task.
This is really great, thanks. I was curious about, and I don't know if you got into this, I might have missed it, but course ratings, I know there's like so much variance in distances and technicalities, but I don't know how that factors in. The one thing it got me jogging about was like, if you're familiar with index ratings on handicaps for golf, where there's a course rating and then you pick your 4, 5, 6 best scores. Some similarities there, but I didn't know how that, I just ran my first ultra, so I'm just thinking about how technical it was and things like that and various courses that could be involved.
So the question is mainly how the race difficulty.
Course difficulty and how that factors into
Yeah,
the model.
yeah. So it's a good question. At the moment, it does not. Because so in this case, for example, for this model, this was only predicted in it was only for UTMB, and we tried to generalize it, for example, to the Lavaredo Ultra Trail because we recently got data from them for race director, but we still haven't done anything on that. In terms of the ranking, yes, we are trying to understand exactly how can we factor race difficulty into that. So ITRA has used to have it, or at least perhaps it does, have an index of difficulty for each race. And the difficulty is given by some combination of the length of the distance and the terrain and the altitude, elevation gain of the distance of the race. And how to factor it in, yeah, it's not clear yet. Especially, sorry, yeah, let me just, one thing that comes to mind is for example, one problem with the ultra sign up index is that we see a lot of spread, in longer races, there is a much longer time gap between the first finisher and the last finisher. In shorter races, the proportional time gap is very small. So basically, for example, in UTMB, the first runner finishes in 20 hours, and the last runner finishes in 45 hours. But the last runner is still very, very good to be there. In shorter races, if you do a 10K or a 6-mile race or something like that, the proportional gap is going to be 25% or something like that, but not as long. So there is this real problem that when you go into these longer races, you pay the price just because yeah, the time gap just increases, and elite runners can keep that pace for a longer time, and you just cannot, like anybody else.
Hey, yeah, so I was curious if you looked into year-over-year comparison at all with this. I know it's really difficult with especially weather. Somewhere like the Western States, if it's hot one year, not the. Did you even think about that, or is that too hard of a problem to tackle?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Western States is the trickiest example, I think, because if you get an year that is it's just warm and not hot, then everybody's gonna do very well. For UTMB, it was something we had not considered in the beginning, and when we submitted a paper, a reviewer pointed out, wait, you see this, basically for the year when it was very hot, 40% of the runners withdrew from the race. The other years, it was 30%. So we observed this 10% increase in the percentage of withdrawals from the race. That was basically explained by weather. And I was there that year at UTMB, just watching. It was just crazy. You could see people struggle, and it's something yeah, we did not even factor it in the data. And then when the reviewer told us, we were like, oh, yeah, of course it makes sense.
Last question here.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. One thing I'm really wondering is about you rank all the performance thing about gender, but I feel like trail running is actually interesting. The longer the distance is, sometimes gender doesn't matter that much anymore. Like Courtney Duarter, she won the Moab 200.
I know. Yeah, but Courtney is
she's a beast.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So did you guys do some any analysis at what kind of distance the gender difference kind of minimized?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. We did not, and the reason is that I don't have it in the data yet. So in the data that have been given by David and Ultra Sign Up is that we don't see the distance yet for each race, and it's one of the. When I'm talking about data collection and problems, it's actually one of the problems with Ultra Sign Up that the race directors put the distance as a text. So then there's a problem because sometimes they misspell it and so on, and it's not in the data that they gave me. But yes, that would be an extremely interesting analysis. And yeah, I have to remark that Courtney is like, it's from a different planet, but yes. Good. Thank you.